Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session today that we have entitled, If We Can't Decolonize, What Can We Do? We're going to start with some short introductions. So my name is Monica Leisey. I'm an associate professor in the School of Social Work at Salem State University in Salem, Massachusetts. And I will invite Karen to introduce herself.
I'm Karen Kieffer. I'm new faculty in the School of Social Work at Salem State, where I only a few years ago graduated from that program.
Thanks, Karen. So Karen was in the past a student of mine. She is now one of our colleagues. And we've been working together on and off since she was in our MSW program. And one of the areas that we have spent quite a bit of time talking about is really around pedagogy and how to be supportive and accessible and to provide really important learning spaces, recognizing that those spaces are grounded in trusting professional relationships. And so this presentation comes from work that I did as I was returning to the classroom in 2020. I had been serving our university in different administrative positions, so I had been teaching, but only part-time. As I was getting ready to return to the classroom in the middle of a pandemic, I realized a couple of things. One, I had no idea how to teach remotely. I had never done that. And I really wanted to spend more time critically interrogating what it was I believed about teaching, how to manifest that in a remote classroom, while also incorporating some continually emerging awareness of how to truly be an anti-racist social work instructor. I have been on that journey for a really long time, and most recently have really been partnering with other members of our university community to do DEI work personally within our School of Social Work and also at the university level. So for the 2020-2021 academic year, I really reconceptualized what teaching was for me and how I thought about it. And it has significantly changed what I now do with students in classrooms. And most of this, if not all of it, is really grounded in Tima Okun's list of white supremacy culture characteristics. So while I believe this is pretty well known, I do want to take a moment to share my screen and to show what those characteristics are, if it will let me. Oh, here we go. So I hope you can now see this the slide of the white supremacy culture characteristics that Tima Okun has published. I believe this is at least 5 years old now. And as you look at them, I hope what you can see is most of them show up in higher education. Many of them, I think, show up in pedagogy, the way that we have conceptualized pedagogy in the past. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And so what we thought might be really interesting to share with you is the fact that Karen is now teaching a course that I reconceptualized, that I recreated to be a course that she took, and yet now looks significantly different. And you know, some of the things that she has wondered and been struggling with, I hope gently struggling with, as she has transitioned into the role of instructor. So Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So one of the things that some of the universal ideas that I think are inherent in these changes are your commitment to Paulo Freire and that kind of pedagogy. And that seems like it's applicable to any context. Here we're working graduate studies, and that seems to apply to any context. And also the idea of the relationship being important in the classroom among the students, and the relationship of the group and with the instructor. And there are some issues that come up. So I've noticed that students are so used to that way of doing things that they have learned, that reproductive learning, where they take in information and regurgitate it back, and that's always been rewarded. And so when you open up the classroom and the course and the material to be so wide open and flexible, and you really want the students to be in dialogue and learn about the dangers of certainty and how to hold uncertainty and ambiguity, and they're freaking out. They have a hard time with all of this freedom that we want them to step into. And so that's been thinking about how to help scaffold the student's skill in walking into that, because it's not something that you can just be differently and even understand it if you've never experienced it before. So how to help them hold the stress of not knowing, the uncertainty of what might happen, and all the undefined things where they have freedom. We mean it to be freedom, but they feel it sometimes as untetheredness, and they don't know what's expected, and they're still looking for that. And how to use the process to help them gain those skills in the process. So this is, I see them really stress out from not knowing how to show up, and they're not sure what they have to offer the process.
I have experienced a little bit of that as well, Karen. I think, so one of the things that I did this year that I had not done before is I spent the entire first class session without the syllabus, and talked about the importance of learning to relationship and why getting to know each other was a really important piece of what we were going to do. Had a number of conversations with different student groups, sometimes the whole class, sometimes, outside of class with a student, to talk about the difference between what they have always experienced as education and what education from my perspective looks like. In some cases, at least in one case, I can say a person said, but I want you to do your job, without understanding that my job I was doing my job, right? Inviting them in, asking them to identify what they are curious about, using the time in a class to figure out so this particular class is a community practice class. So helping them see that the building of community is what we are doing in class and what you are to be learning from this class, right? So, for social work, the building a trusting professional relationship is the core of all of the things that we do. And what I've tried to do is help them see that when you do that at the community practice level, it's as important, maybe more important, but that's my bias. It is as important as working one-on-one with an individual, and that we don't have to simply repeat what's been done before. We don't have to rush into covering material, because the process of what we're doing is the material. I've had some students, actually, I had one student at the very beginning of a semester when I used the syllabus just ask me that straight out, like, oh, so this is like how you would facilitate a community group? Like, I mean, because it was, it it was obvious to that student, like they just got it. Other students, I've had to kind of show them, we are going to cover material. This is the material we'll cover. And based on this new way of being in the world during this pandemic, we also want to make it doable for everyone. So some of what might feel like loosey-goosiness is really my attempt to hold people where they're at. You know, one of the changes that I made to the syllabus this year, which was a stretch for me, was not having deadlines. Like everything is due by the end of the semester. Here's some suggestions about how you might want to move through the semester. Here's when you might want to hand some things in. But everybody's life is a little bit ridiculous and complex right now. Having an arbitrary due date doesn't seem to help anyone. So, you know, what I've tried to do is help students make those connections and to help them, or at least to try to explain to them that my intention is to hold them in a space where they can be curious and where they don't have to know things. Because sometimes graduate students walk in the program thinking I'm supposed to know this stuff, right? That's a transition that's beyond the purview of this conversation, but really trying to provide a holding environment that is safe for those concerns and anxieties to be voiced or at least be shared in some way.
Yeah. And all of those intentions. So for me, I inherited a syllabus. This is my first semester teaching. And the course is very different than what I experienced. And even then, when it felt a little bit more solid, it still wasn't solid. So I remember this feeling of not knowing what was expected of me. And I remember that was difficult. So when anyone inherits a curriculum or a syllabus, the person who created it is also in the room.
Yes.
Right. And I'm not in that person's head to understand all the intention and all the wisdom behind that and the vision of how to march it out. And so there's this relationship that's not present in the room, but that I feel, and maybe the students feel the absence of that in terms of not being able to articulate in the same way with the same kind of clarity and march things out. And so when it's yours, you can hold that uncertainty a little bit differently, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I believe that if we accept that all education is relationally grounded, then the syllabus absolutely takes on the personality of the person who created it. And I lived most of my life in the gray, as Karen well knows, where I don't believe that either or is, it doesn't usually work for me. I'm really more of a both and person. And so my willingness to adopt or adapt as a course moves forward, to make changes on the fly, to figure out what a classroom needs and say, okay, well, we had agreed to this, but we can change it. What do you think as a community? What do we think it would be helpful? Is really easy to do if you come to the work as I do, and it's your syllabus and you feel pretty comfortable changing it. Mm-hmm. And even though, Karen, you and I have talked and I have said, yeah, here are all the things that are yours to change, I absolutely can appreciate that that there are going to be times where it's going to feel like, okay, this isn't, I'm not quite sure what to do with this.
So here's where the mentorship relationship really matters, because it mattered to me. And I really heard you said, no, you have authority to make these changes, and your confidence in me to do that, and your giving me the freedom that maybe I didn't know to take or felt comfortable taking, I felt confident. And so we've been in this course about 5 or 6 weeks of 15.
Mhm.
And last week, I was able to just say, we need to stop and have this conversation because people are feeling disengaged or they feel lost, and let's bring each other together again. And so in the course of the learning about the learning as well, right?
Uh-huh.
What skills can I introduce to help people create dialogue and help create access to the conversation? And so last week I used a sociocracy method of having a conversation in a round where people each take a turn surfacing what the issues are, and then another round of how do we make a decision about this and what would be the best thing to do, and then people propose things. And so we were able to come to some understanding of what was difficult for all of us, and come to an understanding what the situation was, and some ways forward that everyone felt good about. That process is not meant for consensus where everyone has to agree, but it's moving forward to the next place in an inclusive way. And so it was wonderful to see that students who hadn't spoken up before had the space to say their thing. And so I think that was really productive, and that idea that this is the conversation of this moment, right?
Well, and I will also note that what you did really is also a manifestation of the book that we're using in class. So I used to use, kind of like textbooks, traditional expensive textbooks that said, here's what we know about community practice, here's how it works, here are the right ways. The very last book I used was Hardcastle's Community Practice. It's a great book. But it really did focus on right ways of doing things. So I shifted this year to, I'm currently using Adrienne Maree Brown's Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change and Changing Worlds by AK, or published by AK Press. It is not a textbook, so it's not expensive, which was important to me. It is written by a woman of color who is really clear in how she self-identifies in the book in very, very many ways, and really provides all kinds of multiple perspectives about what change is, how it happens, and one of the really cool things is she links all of that to nature. What you did brought to life a number of the things that Adrienne Maree Brown talks about in terms of, there's a conversation that can happen in the room that can only happen in that room, right? So you have to find it and have it. How do you make space? What you demonstrated was, here's one way to make sure all the voices have the opportunity to show up. And so even though maybe what you probably did realize, because you're a really smart woman, but even though the students in the class maybe didn't pick up, oh my goodness, we are doing what the book talks about, you provided an opportunity for them to see that there are really important ways to build community, to hear all of the voices, and it's important to take that time. And I would imagine that you have at least a couple of students in your class who thought, we didn't cover anything in class that day.
We did have a question. Why are we doing this?
Yeah, so we didn't cover any course material because you didn't lecture and there was nothing for me to write down, and I can't use this in a paper. And yet I bet an enormous amount of learning happened. And those are the kinds of opportunities that I think make for inclusive spaces, that make for real, what I feel is real education. And that education in this case is graduate level education, where people have to be good critical and creative thinkers. But this can be used for almost, at any level, really, as long as the reason for what you're doing and what you're doing are absolutely connected to the importance of those relationships.
Yeah. And so in that conversation, we talked about power, what is power sharing? And so how can I explain the power that I have as an instructor? What are my duties? What are my responsibilities? And what are the things that I can open up? I can share my decision-making process, and no, you don't get to decide as students, but I can create this consultative space where we can make decisions together. And yes, I still hold the ultimate power. I have the power to judge you in your work. And why is that important? So we had that conversation about who are we to each other? Am I part of this community as the instructor? And while I am given the responsibility to make a judgment, and there are reasons for that gatekeeping function, and we even talked about that. Should I have that power? And I asked them how many terrible social workers they knew, and that the gatekeeping, is there are places where we want to make sure that we don't put people in situations with vulnerable people in a moment where they can do harm. And we can never prevent that totally. We don't have control of the universe, but there are places where we can see, oh, this is not going down a good road. And so being able to have that conversation and make all of the hidden powers, bring them into the room and talk about them, helped them understand what powers they do have and what our relationship can be. And then in terms of like trying to bring along the principles of the Emergent Strategies book and say, okay, what did we just do? And what principles did we invoke here and enact and embody here to connect that theoretical perspective with what we just did in a lived way? Not even just thinking about an experience of a case or an experience in the past, but what did we just do in this moment? And that was really helpful.
Yeah, I bet. One of the other things that comes up for me when you mentioned the power sharing is also the changes that I made to the way I'm evaluating students. In the past, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen once more. In the past, I've used a pretty traditional course assessment process. Each assignment was worth a certain number of points. At the end of the semester, I added up all those points, and that would give you, that'd be your grade. When I had a writing assignment, I would have some points, 10% of the points would, judge your writing, 90% was for content. Assignments had deadlines, and I did not accept late papers. And all of that, all of that was really my thinking about gatekeeping and standards. But what I realized is that my arbitrary deadlines maybe weren't helpful. And the way I was evaluating assignments felt like it came from a very deficit model perspective. Where can I look to take away points? And so what I've moved to, so what I did was is on the left-hand side. What I'm currently doing is on the right, where I'm really just evaluating work according to whether it's not done. And that means that you didn't follow the instructions or answer the question. You did it and it's good enough. You demonstrated to me that you got whatever it was you were supposed to get. Or, wow, this is really done well. And I define what being done well means. And so the grade at the end of the semester is just the mode. I try to have an uneven number of things so that I have a mode, a real mode, I don't end up with a bimodal situation. And I've provided rubrics, which I'm going to share those too here in a moment. And for all of the assignments, students have what I'm calling a revise and resubmit. If you didn't answer the question, you can redo it. If you did fine, I'll stop sharing now for a moment. If you did fine, but fine isn't good enough for you, we can have a conversation about, here's what I see, here's what I'm looking for. And if students want to try again, they absolutely can. And what I'm looking for, I'm just pulling up my other rubric, which is not very complicated. So let me share my screen again. It's maybe extraordinarily complex in its simplicity, is if you didn't answer the question or you don't hand anything in, you get 0 out of 0. You just get a 0, and it means this was lovely, but not appropriate or not the right. You didn't answer the question, try again, or you answered it incorrectly. Oh, if you get a 1, it's because you answered the question, you did what the assignment required, but you didn't go beyond what was asked. You didn't show me critical thinking. You just said, here's my answer, done. Okay, that's good enough. If you not only answer the question, but you demonstrate to me that you've spent some time thinking about this. You didn't just pick an answer and say, here's my answer. You connected the ideas to another course, you identified a new perspective, you provide an alternative view. You've done something with the material that we've covered as opposed to simply regurgitate it, which is kind of where you started, or what you had mentioned earlier, Karen, in terms of that reproduction of knowledge. If you've done something that shows me you are truly engaged in the material, that's extraordinary work. And there's nothing left for you to do. Education faculty, at least on our campus, are really thinking about ways to both model and to incorporate decentering ideas so that students graduate from high school with the skills they need, and that it incorporates critical thinking, right? So trying to make space in all areas of education for multiple ways of being, multiple ways of thinking, acknowledging the inherent white supremacy culture that really has been inculcated into all of our systems, and how do we start teasing that out in a way that is useful, in a way that makes sense, and in a way that doesn't cause harm, because we've done plenty of that. Mm-hmm. What was important to me about what I did in rethinking the syllabus and how to be in a classroom was that it is really all about relationship, and we need to make space for students to show up with their whole selves. That many students have learned how to do school, but they haven't learned how to be in school and an engaged learner. And so partly that is what we're trying to encourage, the direction we're hoping to encourage folks to move. And that rigor shouldn't be about holding a traditional standard. You know, rigor isn't about doing more or reifying the ideas of white supremacy culture. Rigor should be about the facilitation of growth and understanding the course concepts that are in the objectives, if you will. And that good pedagogy includes the what and the how we teach, and maybe the how is more important than the what.
Yeah, because if it's going to be education instead of training, there's a big component of self-learning, right, and growth there. And that is very personal to people. And I think that always happens better when people can be supportive individually and in a group in that relational way. So to me, that's a big difference between education and training programs.
Yeah.
Is that you really are growing as a person and discovering new ways of seeing the world and yourself. Well, thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Karen. This was great.